Countdown to Halloween 2022, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. The first Monday of every month at exactly midnight, a new story will appear on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2022. Plan to catch these each month or you'll miss one. Each story will be 13 to 30 minutes long. And now, tonight's story from Storylink Radio. Glámr by Sabine Baring-Gould. This story is based on a famous episode in Iceland's Grettir Saga, which was written down in the early 14th century. It tells of a fight to the death between Grettir, a mighty warrior, and a vampire named Glámr. The latter is a drogar, which is the name Icelanders of that period gave to an animated corpse. In appearance, these restless dead are hideous to look at and carry the unmistakable stench of the grave, from which they periodically emerge to prey on the living. Unlike ghosts, they have a corporeal body and possess superhuman strength, and they can also increase their size at will, making them formidable adversaries indeed. The author was an English clergyman, hagiographer, and prolific storyteller, and remembered as the composer of hymns, the best known being Onward Christian Soldiers. At the beginning of the 11th century there stood, a little way up the Valley of Shadows in the north of Iceland, a small farm, occupied by a worthy bonder named Thorhall and his wife. The farmer was not exactly a chieftain, but he was well enough connected to be respectable. To back up his gentility, he possessed numerous flocks of sheep and a goodly drove of oxen. Thorhall would have been a happy man, but for one circumstance. His sheep walks were haunted. Not a herdsman would remain with him. He bribed, he threatened, entreated, all to no purpose. One shepherd after another left his service, and things came to such a pass that he determined on asking advice at the next annual council. Thorhall saddled his horses, adjusted his packs, provided himself with hobbles, cracked his long Icelandic whip, and cantered along the road, and in due time he reached Thingvellir. Now Skapti Thorod's son was lawgiver at that time, and as everyone considered him a man of utmost prudence and able to give the best advice, our friend from the Vale of Shadows made straight for his booth. An awkward predicament, certainly, to have large droves of sheep and no one to look after them, said Skapti, nibbling the nail of his thumb and shaking his wise head. A head is stuffed with law as a ptarmigan's crop is stuffed with blaeberries. Now, I'll tell you what. As you have asked my advice, I will help you to a shepherd. A shepherd, yes, a character in his way. A man of dull intellect, to be sure, but strong as a bull. Well, I do not care about his wits so long as he can look after my sheep, answered Thorhall. Oh, you may rely on his being able to do that, said Skapti. He is a stout, plucky fellow, a Swede from Silgsdale, if you know where that is. Towards the break of the council, or thing they called it in Iceland, two grayish-white horses belonging to Thorhall slipped their hobbles and strayed, and so the good man had to hunt after them himself, which shows how short of servants he really was. He crossed Slethaasi, and then bent his way to Armansfell, and just by the priest's wood he met a strange-looking man driving before him a horse laden with faggots. The fellow was tall and stalwart. His face involuntarily attracted Thorhall's attention, for the eyes, of an ashen gray, were large and staring, and the powerful jaw was furnished with very white protruding teeth, and around the low forehead hung bunches of coarse wolf-gray hair. Pray, what is your name, my man? Asked the farmer, pulling up. Glámr, and please you, replied the woodcutter. Thorhall stared, And then with a preliminary cough, he asked how Glámr liked faggot picking. Not much, was the answer. I prefer shepherd life. Is that so? Will you come with me then? Asked Thorhall. Skapti has handed you over to me, and I want to shepherd this winter uncommonly. If I serve you, it is on the understanding that I come or go as it pleases me. I tell you I am a bit truculent if things do not go just to my thinking. Well, I shall not object to this, answered the bonder. And so I may count on your services, then? Well, wait a moment. You have not told me whether there be any drawback. Well, I must acknowledge there is one drawback, said Thorhall. In fact, the sheepwalks have got a bad name for the bogies. For sure. I'm not the man to be scared at shadows. Laughed Glámr. So here's my hand to it. I'll be with you at the beginning of the winter night, eh? Well, after this they parted, and presently the farmer found his ponies. Having thanked Skapti for his advice and assistance, he got his horses together and trotted home. Summer, and then autumn passed, but not a word about the new shepherd reached the Valley of Shadows. The winter storms began to bluster up the glen, driving the flying snowflakes and massing the white drifts at every winding of the vale. Ice formed in the shallows of the river, and the streams, which in summer trickled down the ribbed scarps, were now transmuted into icicles. And then one gusty night, a violent blow at the door startled all on the farm. In another moment, Glámr, tall as a troll, stood in the hall glowering out of his wild eyes, his grey hair matted with frost, his teeth rattling and snapping with cold, his face blood-red in the glare of the fire which smoldered in the center of the hall. Thorhall jumped up and greeted him warmly, but the housewife was too frightened to be very cordial. Weeks passed, and the new shepherd was daily on the moors with his flock. His loud and deep-toned voice was often borne down the blast as he shouted to the sheep, driving them into the fold. His presence in the house always produced gloom, and if he spoke, it sent a thrill through the women, who openly proclaimed their aversion for him. There was a church near the byre, but Glámr never crossed the threshold. He hated psalmody. Apparently he was an indifferent Christian. On the vigil of the Nativity, Glámr rose early and shouted for meat. "Meat!" exclaimed the housewife. "No man calling himself a Christian touches flesh today. Tomorrow's the holy Christmas day. This is a fast." "All superstition," roared Glámr. "As far as I can see, men are no better now than they were in the bonny heathen times. Bring me meat and make no more ado about it." "You may be quite certain," protested the good wife. "If church rule be not kept, ill luck will follow." Glámr ground his teeth and clenched his hands. "Meat! I will have meat, or—" In fear and trembling, the poor woman obeyed. The day was raw and windy. Masses of gray vapor rolled up from the Arctic Ocean and hung in piles about the mountain tops. Now and then a scud of frozen fog, composed of minute particles of ice, swept along the glen, covering bar and beam with a feathery hoarfrost. As the day declined, snow began to fall in large flakes, like the down of the eider duck. One moment there was a lull in the wind. Then the deep-toned shout of Glámr, high up the moor slopes, was distinctly heard by the congregation assembling for the first vespers of Christmas Day. Darkness came on, deep as that in the rayless abysses of the caverns under the lava, and still the snow fell thicker. The lights from the church windows set a yellow haze far out into the night, and every flake burned golden as it swept within the ray. The bell in the lich gate clanged for evensong, and the wind puffed the sound far up the glen. Perhaps it reached the herdsman's ears. Hark! Someone caught a distant sound, or a shriek, which it was he could not tell, for the wind muttered and mumbled about the church eaves, and then with a fierce whistle scudded over the graveyard fence. Glámr had not returned when the service was over. Thorhall suggested a search, but no man would accompany him, and no wonder. It was not a night for a dog to be out in. Besides, the tracks were a foot deep in the snow. The family sat up all night, waiting, listening, trembling, but no Glámr came home. Dawn broke at last, wan and blear in the south. The clouds hung down like great sheets full of snow, almost to bursting. A party was soon formed to search for the missing men. A sharp scramble brought them to high land, and the ridge between the two rivers which join in Vatnsdalr was thoroughly examined. Here and there were found the scattered sheep, shuddering under an icicled rock or half buried in a snowdrift, but no trace yet of the keeper. A dead ewe lay at the bottom of a crag. It had staggered over in the gloom and had been dashed to pieces. Presently the whole party were called together about a trampled spot in the heath, where evidently a death struggle had taken place, for earth and stone were tossed about, and the snow was blotched with large splashes of blood. A gory track led up the mountain, and the farm servants were following it, when a cry, almost of agony, from one of the lads made them turn. In looking behind a rock, the boy had come upon the corpse of the shepherd. It was livid and swollen to the size of a bullock. It lay on its back with the arms extended. The snow had been scrabbled up by the puffed hands in death agony, and the staring glassy eyes gazed out of the ashen-gray upturned face into the vaporous canopy overhead. From the purple lips lolled the tongue, in which the last throes had bitten through by the white fangs, and a discolored stream which had flowed from it was now an icicle. With considerable trouble the dead man was raised on a litter and carried to a gill edge, but beyond this he could not be borne. His weight waxed more and more. The bearers toiled beneath their burden. Their foreheads became beaded with sweat. Though strong men, they were crushed to the ground. Consequently, the corpse was left at the ravine head, and the men returned to the farm. Next day, their efforts to lift Glámr's bloated carcass and remove it to consecrated ground were unavailing. On the third day, a priest accompanied them, but the body, yes, the body now, was nowhere to be found. Another expedition without the priest was made, and on this occasion the corpse was discovered, and so a cairn was raised over the spot. 2 nights after this, one of the thralls who had gone after the cows burst into the hall with a face blank and scared. He staggered to a seat and fainted. On recovering his senses, in a broken voice, he assured all who crowded about him that he had seen Glámr walking past him as he left the door of the stable. On the following evening, too, a houseboy was found in a fit under a farmyard wall, and he remained an idiot to his dying day. Some of the women next saw a face which, though blown out and discolored, they recognized as that of Glámr, looking in upon them through a window of the dairy. In the twilight, Thorhall himself met the dead man, who stood and glowered at him, but made no attempt to injure his master. The haunting did not end there. Nightly a heavy tread was heard around the house, and a hand feeling along the walls, sometimes thrust in at the windows, at other times clutching at the woodwork and breaking it into splinters. However, when the spring came round, the disturbances lessened, and as the sun obtained full power, ceased altogether. That summer a vessel from Norway dropped anchor in the nearest bay. Thorhall visited it, and found on board a man named Thorgalt, who was in search of work. "Well, what would you say to being my shepherd?" asked the bonder. "Well, I should very much like that, officer," answered Thorgalt. "I'm as strong as 2 ordinary men, and I'm a handy fellow to boot, Well, I will not engage you without forewarning you of the terrible things you may have to encounter during the winter nights." "Pray, what may they be?" "Ghosts and hobgoblins," answered the farmer. "Yes, a fine dance they lead me, I can promise you that." "Oi, I fear not ghosts or hobgoblins or their like," answered Thorgott. "Yes, I shall be with you at cattle slaughtering time. At the appointed season the man came, and soon established himself as a favorite in the house. He romped with the children, he chucked the maidens under the chin, he helped his fellow servants, gratified the housewife by admiring her curd, and was just as much liked as his predecessor had been detested. He was a devil-may-care fellow, too, and made no bones of his utter contempt for the ghost, expressing hopes of meeting him face to face, which made his master look grave and his mistress shudderingly cross herself. And as the winter came on, strange sights and sounds began to alarm the folk. But these never frightened Thorgalt. He slept too soundly at night to hear the tread of feet about the door, and was too short-sighted to catch glimpses of a grisly monster striding up and down in the twilight before its cairn. At last, Christmas Eve came round, and Thorgalt went out as usual with his sheep. "Have a care, man," urged the bonder. "Go not near to the gill-head where Glámr lies." "Tut, tut! Fear not for me, my friend. I shall be back by vespers."
"Oh, God grant it so,"
sighed the housewife.
"But 'tis not a day for risks, to be sure."
Twilight came on. A feeble light hung over the south, one white streak above the heathland at the south. Far off in the southern lands it was still day, but here the darkness gathered in apace, and men from Vatnsdalir for evensong to herald in the night when Christ was born. Christmas Eve. How different in Saxon England. There the great ashen faggot is rolled along the hall with torch and taper. The mummers dance with their merry jingling bells. The boar's head with gilded tusks, bedecked with holly and rosemary, is brought in by the steward, a flourish of trumpets. How different, too, were the Varinger cluster round the imperial throne in the mighty church of the eternal wisdom at this very hour. Outside, the air is soft from breathing over the Bosphorus, which flashes tremulously beneath the stars. The orange and laurel leaves in the palace gardens are still exhaling fragrance in the hush of the Christmas night. But here it is different. The wind is piercing as a two-edged sword. Blocks of ice crash and grind along the coast. The lake waters are congealed to stone. Aloft the aurora flames crimson, flinging long streamers into the zenith, and then suddenly dissolving into a sea of pale green light. The natives are waiting round the church door, but no Thorgalt has returned. They find him next morning, lying across Glámr's cairn, with his spine, his legs, and arm bones shattered. He is conveyed to the churchyard, and a cross is set up at his head. He sleeps peacefully. Not so Glámr. He becomes more furious than ever. No one will remain with Thorhall now, except an old cowherd who has always served the family, and had long ago dandled his present master on his knee.
"All the cattle will be lost if I leave," said the carle. "It shall never be told of me that I deserted Thorhall from fear of a spectre."
Matters grew rapidly worse. Outbuildings were broken into of a night. Their woodwork was rent and shattered. The house door was violently shaken, and great pieces of it were torn away. The gables of the house were also pulled furiously to and fro. One morning before dawn, the old man went to the stable. An hour later, his mistress arose, and taking her milking pails, followed him. As she reached the door of the stable, a terrible sound from within, the bellowing of the cattle mingled with the deep notes of an unearthly voice, sent her back shrieking to the house. Thorhall leaped out of bed, caught up a weapon, and hastened to the cowhouse. On opening the door, he found the cattle goring each other. Slung across the stone that separated the stalls was something. Thorhall stepped up to it, felt it, looked close. It was the cowherd, perfectly dead. His feet on one side of the slab, his head on the other, and his spine snapped in twain. The bonder now moved with his family to Tonga, another farm owned by him lower down the valley. It was too venturesome living during the midwinter night at the haunted farm, and it was not till the sun had returned as a bridegroom out of his chamber and had dispelled the night with its phantoms that he went back to the Vale of Shadows. In the meantime, His little girl's health had given way under the repeated alarms of the winter. She became paler every day. With the autumn flowers she faded, and was laid beneath the mold of the churchyard in time for the first snows to spread a virgin pall over her small grave. At this time Grettir, a hero of great fame and a native of the north of the island, Grettir was in Iceland, and as the hauntings of this vale were matters of gossip throughout the district, he inquired about them and resolved on visiting the scene himself. So Grettir busked himself for a cold ride, mounted his horse, and in due course of time drew rein at the door of Thorhall's farm with the request that he might be accommodated there for the night.
Ahem,
Coughed the bonder.
Perhaps you are not aware of... I am perfectly aware of all. I want to catch sight of that troll. But your horse is sure to be killed. I will risk it. Glámr I must meet, so there's an end of it. Well, I'm delighted to see you then, spoke the bonder. At the same time, should mischief befall you, don't lay the blame at my door. Never fear, man.
And so they shook hands. The horse was put into the strongest stable. Thorhall made Grettir as good cheer as he was able, and then as the visitor was sleepy, all retired to rest. The night passed quietly, and no sounds indicated the presence of a restless spirit. The horse, moreover, was found next morning in good condition, enjoying his hay.
Well, this is unexpected,
Claimed the bonder gleefully.
Now, where's the saddle? We'll clap it on and then goodbye and a merry journey to you. Goodbye, echoed Grettir. I'm going to stay here another night. You'd best be advised, urged Thorhall. If misfortune should overtake you, I know that all your kinsmen would visit it on my head.
I have made up my mind to stay, said Grettir, and he looked so dogged that Thorhall opposed him no more. All was quiet the next night. Not a sound roused Grettir from his slumber. Next morning he went with the farmer to the stable. The strong wooden door was shivered and driven in. They stepped across it. Grettir called to his horse, but there was no responsive whinny.
I am afraid,
began Thorhall. Grettir leaped in and found the poor brute dead with its neck broken.
Now, said Thorhall quickly. I've got a capital horse, a schoolboy down by Tonga. I shall not be many hours in fetching it. Your saddle here, I think, and then you'll just have time to reach...
I stay here another night, interrupted Grettir.
I implore you to depart, said Thorhall.
My horse is slain,
but I will provide you with another.
Friend, answered Grettir, turning so sharply round the farmer jumped back half frightened. No man ever did me an injury without ruing it. Now your demon herdsman has been the death of my horse. He must be taught a lesson.
Oh, would that he were, groaned Thorhall, but mortal must not face him. Go in peace and receive compensation from me for what has happened.
I must revenge my horse.
Yes, an obstinate man will have his own way.
But if you run your head against a stone wall, don't be angry because you get a broken pate. Night came on. Grettir ate a hearty supper and was right jovial. Not so Thorhall, who had his misgivings. At bedtime the latter crept into his crib, which in the manner of old Icelandic beds opened out of the hall as berths do out of a cabin. Grettir, however, determined on remaining up. So he flung himself on a bench with his feet against the post of the high seat and his back against Thorhall's crib. Then he wrapped one lappet of his fur coat round his feet, the other about his head, keeping the neck opening in front of his face so that he could look out through into the hall. There was a fire burning on the hearth, a smouldering heap of red embers. Every now and then a twig flared up and crackled, giving Grettir glimpses of the rafters, as he lay with his eyes wandering among the mysteries of the smoke-blackened roof. The wind whistled softly overhead. The clerestory windows, covered with the amnion of the sheep, admitted now and then a sickly yellow glare from the full moon, which, however, shot a beam of pure silver through the smoke hole in the roof. The dog without began to howl. The cat, which had long been sitting demurely watching the fire, stood up with raised back and bristling tail, and then darted behind some chests in a corner. The hall door was in a sad plight. It had been so riven by the spectre that it was made firm by wattles only, and the moon glinted athwart the crevices. Soothingly, the river, not yet frozen over, paddled over its shingly bed as it swept round the knoll on which stood the farm. Grettir heard the breathing of the sleeping women in the adjoining chamber and the sigh of the housewife as she turned in her bed. Click, click, click. But it is only the frozen turf on the roof cracking with the cold. The wind lulls completely. The night is very still without. Hark! A heavy tread beneath which the snow yields. Every footfall goes straight to Grettir's heart. A crash on the turf overhead. By all the saints in paradise, the monster is treading on the roof. For one moment the chimney gap is completely darkened. Glámr is looking down it. The flash of the red ash is reflected in the two lustreless eyes. Then the moon glances sweetly in once more, and the heavy tramp of Glámr is audibly moving towards the farther end of the hall. A thud. He has leaped down. Grettir feels the board at his back quivering, for Thorhall is awake and is trembling in his bed. The steps pass round to the back of the house. Then the snapping of the wood shows the creatures destroying some of the outhouse doors. Wherever will they go potty now? He tires of this apparently, for his footfall comes clear towards the main entrance to the hall. The moon is veiled behind a watery cloud, and by the uncertain glimmer, Grettir fancies that he has seen two dark hands thrust in above the door. His apprehensions are verified, for with a loud snap a long strip of panel breaks and the light is admitted. Snap! 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 Another portion gives way, and the gap becomes larger. Then the wattles slip from their places, and a dark arm rips them out in bunches and flings them away. There is a crossbeam to the door, holding a bolt which slides into the stone groove. Against the grey light, Grettir sees a huge black figure heaving itself over the bar. Crack! That has given way, and the rest of the door falls in shivers to the earth. "Oh, heavens above!" exclaims the bonda. Stealthily the dead man creeps on, feeling at the beams as he comes. Then he stands in the hall with the firelight on him. A fearful sight. The tall figure distended with the corruption of the grave, the nose fallen off, the wandering vacant eyes, the glaze of death upon them, and the sallow flesh patched with green masses of decay. The wolf-grey hair and beard have grown in the tomb, and hang matted about the shoulders and breast. The nails, too, they have grown. Oh, it is a sickening sight, a thing to shudder at, not to see. Motionless, with no nerve quivering now, Thorhall and Grettir held their breath. Glámr's lifeless glance strayed around the chamber. It is rested on the shaggy bundle by the high seat. Cautiously he stepped towards it. Grettir felt him groping about the lower lappet and pulling at it. The cloak did not give way. Another jerk. Grettir kept his feet firmly pressed against the post so the rug was not pulled off. The vampire seemed puzzled. He plucked at the upper flap and tugged. Grettir held to the bench and bedboard so that he was not moved, but the cloak was rent in twain, and the corpse staggered back, holding half it in his hands and gazing wonderingly at it. Before it had done examining the shred, Grettir started to his feet, bowed his body, flung his arms about the carcass, and driving his head into the chest, strove it to bend it backward to snap the spine. Alas, a vain attempt. The cold hands came down on Grettir's arms with diabolical force, riving them from their hold. Grettir clasped them about the body again. Then the arms closed round him and began dragging him along. The brave man clung by his feet to benches and posts, but the strength of the vampire was greater. Posts gave way, benches were heaved from their places, and the wrestlers at each moment neared the door. Sharply writhing loose, Grettir flung his hands around a roof beam. He was dragged from his feet. The numbing arms clenched him round the waist and tore at him. Every tendon in his breast was strained. The strain under his shoulders became excruciating. The muscles stood out in knots. Still he held on. His fingers were bloodless. The pulses of his temples throbbed in jerks. The breath came in a whistle through his rigid nostrils. All the while, too, the long nails of the dead man cut into his side, and Grettir could feel them piercing like knives between his ribs. Then at once his hands gave way, and the monster bore him reeling towards the porch, crashing over the broken fragments of the door. Hard as the battle had gone with him indoors, Grettir knew that it would go worse outside, so he gathered up all his remaining strength for one final desperate struggle. The door had been shut with a swivel into a groove. This groove was in a stone which formed the jamb on one side, and there was a similar block on the other into which the hinges had been driven. As the wrestlers neared the opening, Grettir planted both his feet against those stone posts, holding Glámr by the middle. He had the advantage now. The dead man writhed in his arms, drove his talons into Grettir's back, and tore up great ribbons of flesh, but the stone jambs held firm. Now, thought Grettir, I can break his back. And thrusting his head under the chin so the grisly beard covered his eyes, he forced the face from him, and the back was bent as a hazel rod. If I can but hold on, thought Grettir, and he tried to shout for Thorhall, but his voice was muffled in the hair of the corpse. Suddenly one or both of the doorposts gave way. Down crashed the gabled trees, ripping beams and rafters from their beds. Frozen clods of earth rattled from the roof and thumped into the snow. Glámr fell on his back, and Grettir staggered down on top of him. The moon was at her full. Large white clouds chased each other across the sky, and as they swept before her disk, she looked through them with a brown halo round her. The snow cap of Jorundarfell, however, glowed like a planet, and then the white mountain ridge was kindled. The light ran down the hillside, the bright disk stared out of the veil, and flashed at this moment full upon the vampire's face. Grettir's strength was failing him. His hands quivered in the snow, and he knew that he could not support himself from dropping flat on the dead man's face, eye to eye, lip to lip. The eyes of the corpse were fixed on him, lit with the cold glare of the moon. His head swam as his heart sent a hot stream into his brain, and then a voice from the grey lips said,
Thou hast acted madly in seeking to match thyself with me. Now learn that henceforth ill luck shall constantly attend thee, that thy strength shall never exceed what it now is, and that by night these eyes of mine shall stare at thee through darkness till thy dying day, so that for very horror thou shalt not endure to be alone.
Grettir at this moment noticed that his dirk had slipped from its sheath during the fall, and that it now lay conveniently near his hand. The giddiness which had oppressed him passed away. He clutched at the sword haft, with a blow severed the vampire's throat, and then kneeling on the breast, he hacked till the head came off. Thorhall appeared, his face blanched with terror. But when he saw how the fray had terminated, he assisted Grettir gleefully to roll the corpse on top of the pile of faggots which had been collected for winter fuel. Fire was applied, and soon far down the valley the flames of the pyre startled people and made them wonder what new horror was being enacted to the upper portion of the Vale of Shadows. Next day, the charred bones were conveyed to a spot remote from the habitations of men, and were there buried. What Glámr had predicted came to pass. Never after did Grettir dare to be alone in the dark. You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2022. Remember to come back for our next tale. Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/storylinkradio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.